Hello and welcome to The Search. I'm Shahid Jurjan. We're going to study Psalm 87 in this lesson, so we'll begin by reading the psalm in its entirety. Psalm 87 of the sons of Korah, a psalm, a song. Verse 1. He has founded his city on the holy mountain. Yahweh loves the gates of Zion more than all the other dwellings of Jacob. Glorious things are said of you, city of God. I will record Rahab and Babylon among those who acknowledge me, Philistia too, and Tyre along with Cush, and will say, This one was born in Zion. Indeed, of Zion it will be said, This one and that one were born in her, and the Most High himself will establish her. Yahweh will write in the register of the peoples, This one was born in Zion. As they make music, they will sing, All my fountains are in you. The title of our study is Zion and the Nations. And again, this is an examination of Psalm 87. Throughout the Psalter, God's holy city is celebrated. In Psalm 46, a beautiful river flows out of the city of God, which is the holy place where the Most High dwells. In Psalm 48, God's city is also called his holy mountain and is described as being beautiful in its loftiness, the joy of the whole earth. In Psalm 76, God is said to dwell in Zion, which is also called Salem, likely short for Jerusalem. And in Psalm 84, Yahweh Almighty's dwelling place is the destination for those pilgrims who travel for worship. Blessed are those who dwell in your house, they are ever praising you. Better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of the wicked. By observing how important Jerusalem and the temple were to the Israelite view of the world, especially in terms of their relationship with God, we can understand why the destruction of the Jerusalem temple was such a traumatic event. Jerusalem's fall was not merely a military defeat, it was the end of the world. The stunning defeat of God called Israel's relationship with Yahweh into serious doubt. I mean, how could Yahweh still be Israel's God and let this happen? Perhaps God had entirely forsaken Israel forever. These were the questions of uncertainty which permeate Book 3 of the Psalter. In the solo Davidic psalm within this collection, clearly set during times of tribulation like the exile, the question of God's relationship with Israel is explored through the nation's representative, King David. This was the last psalm, Psalm 86. We see that David is Yahweh's servant and Yahweh is David's Lord and God. And it's in the midst of David's turmoil, again, as he represents the people, that he turns to God for help. Teach me your way, Yahweh, that I may rely on your faithfulness. Give me an undivided heart that I may fear your name. Psalm 86 and verse 11. Both David and Israel needed to learn how to fully trust in God and how to be entirely loyal to him. Now, before David asks for God to teach him this lesson, he makes a remarkable statement about God's universal rule. This is Psalm 86, verses 8 through 10. Among the gods, there is none like you, Lord. No deeds can compare with yours. All the nations you have made will come and worship before you, Lord. They will bring glory to your name. For you are great and do marvelous deeds. You alone are God. Now, God's unique and marvelous works are the basis for this acclaim, but there are two statements here that are made about the nations, which I think are the basis for the next psalm, Psalm 87. First, you can see there's a claim that God made the nations, and second is the claim that the nations will come to worship the Lord. Keep these statements in mind when we consider the content of this next poem, the psalm of our study presently, which is Psalm 87. Psalm 87 is a Zion song. It's a celebration of God's city. It's structured around 3 units. Verses 1 through 3 offer resounding praise and acclaim for the city of God. Verses 4 through 6 speak of the relationship between Zion and the nations, which again I think is riffing off of Psalm 87. 86 rather. And then in verse 7 of Psalm 87, that seems to reflect a liturgical element where worshipers gathered together would make music and they would sing this line, "All my fountains," or "all my springs are in you." Now, Psalm 87 is a difficult psalm, so we're going to try to work our way through it. Even though it's short, we want to be very careful in our analysis. We have this superscript of the sons of Korah, a psalm, a song. Let's start with verses 1 through 3. He has founded his city on the holy mountain. Yahweh loves the gates of Zion. More than all other dwellings of Jacob, glorious things are said of you, city of God. A number of theological ideas undergird this opening bout of praise for Zion. First, there's the fact that God founded his city. According to the books of Judges and Samuel, the Israelites were unable to dislodge the Jebusites from Jerusalem for centuries, even after Joshua led the conquest of the Promised Land. It was hundreds of years later when David, after becoming king, finally conquered that city. David captured the fortress of Zion, which is the city of David. David then took up residence in the fortress and called it the City of David. He built up the area around it from the terraces inward, and he became more and more powerful because Yahweh, God Almighty, was with him. This is 2 Samuel 5, verses 7, 9, and 10. So Psalm 87 affirms that it was indeed God's presence and power that enabled David's victory and the establishment of this city, which of course quickly became Israel's new capital and the center of religious life once David's son Solomon built the temple. A second theological presupposition that undergirds this psalm is that God's city was founded on the holy mountain. Mountains, of course, feature prominently in the biblical text as places where God's space and humanity's space overlap. The Garden of Eden was on a mountain called the Holy Mount of God, according to Ezekiel 28, verses 13 and 14. Abraham was commanded to offer his son Isaac on a mountain in the region of Moriah, Genesis 22 and verse 2. Mount Sinai was the location of God's spectacular encounter with the recently emancipated Israelites. We see that in Exodus chapter 19. It's no surprise then, of course, that throughout his life, Jesus himself frequently retreated up mountains to commune with God in prayer and to make important ministry decisions. Just before he chose 12 disciples whom he would designate to be his apostles, it says, one of those days Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. Luke chapter 6 and verse 12. One of the most famous scenes in the life of Jesus occurred on a mountain when he was alone with Peter, John, and James. You remember that while Jesus was praying, the appearance of his face changed and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Luke 9, verse 29. Moses and Elijah appeared and conversed with Jesus. And after Peter suggested building 3 tabernacles to honor those men, a cloud appeared and covered them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. Luke 9, verses 34 through 36. Years later, when recalling this event, Peter wrote, "Our Lord Jesus Christ received honor and glory from God the Father when the voice came to him from the majestic glory, saying, 'This is my Son, whom I love, with him I'm well pleased.' We ourselves heard this voice that came from heaven when we were with him on the sacred mountain." 2 Peter 1, verses 17 and 18. And so, it's no accident or happenstance of history that God's city, Zion, was built on a mountain. When considering this city, Psalm 87 and verse 2 affirms that Yahweh's love abounds for Zion more than any of the other cities of Israel. "Glorious things of thee are spoken, O city of God," says verse 3. Now notice that verse 3 indicates that Zion herself is the one whom to whom this song is being sung. In the next section, verses 4 through 6, we're going to encounter then some of the more difficult elements of this psalm. In fact, verses 4 through 6 is fraught with difficulty. There are debates about how to translate this section, certainly about how to interpret these verses, and in fact, how you translate them will impact their meaning. So here in verse 3, again, it says that glorious things are said of Zion. Praise to Zion, songs being sung to Zion. But what are those glorious things? That seems to be the content of verses 4 through 6. I will record Rahab and Babylon among those who acknowledge me, Philistia too, and Tyre, along with Cush, and will say, this one was born in Zion. Indeed, of Zion it will be said, this one and that one were born in her, and the Most High himself will establish her. Yahweh will write in the register of the peoples, this one was born in Zion. Now again, as I said a minute ago, this section's fraught with translation issues. And without spending a lot of time discussing those difficulties, really the main challenge centers around identifying who the people are which are said to have been born in Zion. So the song is being sung to Zion, speaking of people who were born of that city, who now apparently find themselves all over the world, even among the nations. But in some sense, these people are from Zion, and they're registered among the people of Zion. So the difficult question is, well, who are these people? Before we try to identify the people in question, let's consider the setting, the nations which are mentioned. First, we have the name Rahab. When we think of the name Rahab, we probably immediately think of the woman of Jericho who hid the Israelite spies. But Rahab was also a kind of legendary name among Near Eastern people for a dreadful sea monster like Leviathan. And when Rahab is used like this in a list of Gentile nations, Rahab was often a poetic way of describing Egypt. And so Egypt and Babylon represent superpowers, the big enemy forces, the mega empires of the region. Philistia and Tyre, who appear next, well, those are more regional foes. They were Israel's neighbors and constant thorn in Israel's side. Cush here is another name for Ethiopia. Ethiopia is what we find in the New Revised Standard Version. And Ethiopia was often thought of as the most remote place in the world by the Israelite people. I mean, that was the ends of the earth. So what we have here is a list of nations that is probably meant to encompass all the world, from regional foes to these mega empires to even nations far and wide as far as Ethiopia. And from all these disparate places, the psalm says, this one was born in Zion. Verses 4 and 6. Now, scholars have proposed at least three ways three views, I should say, concerning these people who are said to have been born in Zion, but are now spread across the world. And the first view is that this is just speaking of diaspora Jews. This view asserts that Psalm 87's message is one of reassurance for those Jews who are now living among the nations. Perhaps they have found themselves in enemy territory as a result of invasion and war and even exile. Regardless of where these Jewish people were born, their heritage makes them children of Zion, and thus the psalm declares they are still valid citizens among the people of God. So if this is correct, then Psalm 87 is designed to comfort those Jews who have found themselves victims of exile and are currently living among the heathens. Now, the main problem with the diaspora view is that Jews living among the nations would almost certainly not be referred to as Rahab or Babylon. I think the diaspora view stretches the normal use of these terms beyond their usual meaning. Instead, this list of nations here should be thought of as just that, the Gentile nations of the world. It's not the Jews living in these Gentile nations, but the nations themselves, who are now being called citizens of Zion. Okay, maybe it's about diaspora Jews, but our second option is that this is talking about Zion in a kind of mythical sense. Remember, I said that in the previous psalm, Psalm 86, the author makes the claim that all the nations were made by God. And so it's possible that riffing off of that in Psalm 87, the author here is explaining that claim that God is the originator of the nations by using language that would have been known and appropriate for this ancient culture. This would be thinking about Zion as a kind of cradle of civilization, the sort of mythical fountainhead from which all the nations flow. And so even though we have all these nations, they're all from God, they're all made by God, and they all sprang forth from Zion, which is sort of the birthplace of humanity in this way of thinking. Now, this view is not without its difficulties as well, because in verse 6 it says, Yahweh will write in the register of the peoples, this one was born of Zion. So Psalm 87 is not just claiming that the people among the nations were born of God, but also that they're still registered among the people of Zion. Not just that they sprang forth from Zion, but that they still belong to the people of Zion in some sense. So again, it seems unlikely that Psalm 87 is just speaking about the past, some mythical origin story. It's speaking about the present as well, and even about the future. So I'll present the third view, which to me is the one that I think has the most legitimacy. And that is that Psalm 87 is speaking of Zion in a kind of ideal sense, an idyllic Zion. In addition to claiming that all the nations were made by God, again, our previous psalm, Psalm 86 adds, all the nations you have made will come and worship before you, Lord. They will bring glory to your name. The conviction that all the nations will come to know and worship Yahweh is found throughout the Psalter, including among the Zion songs. Psalm 2, of course, is primarily a royal enthronement song, but it also speaks of Yahweh installing his king on Zion, his holy mountain, and then saying to that king, you are my son. Today I have become your father. Ask me, and I will make the nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possession. Psalm 2, verses 6 through 8. So we see the language of God's universal rule and acclaim, and this is found all over the Psalter, even sometimes in lament psalms. Psalm 22, of course, famously begins, my God, why have you forsaken me? But when we get towards the end of the psalm, we find passages like this. All the ends of the earth will remember and turn to Yahweh, and all the families of the nations will bow down before you, for dominion belongs to Yahweh, and he rules over the nations. Psalm 22, verses 27 and 28. So as the Israelites looked out into their world, what would they see? Well, it wouldn't seem like God's universal dominion was a reality. It wouldn't feel like God was really ruling over all the nations. I mean, though the nations belonged to God in some sense, he birthed them and he made them and he granted their existence, they were, and still are, in rebellion against his rule. So Psalm 87 is not only a presentation of the idyllic reign of God over the earth, we've seen that time and time again, but it's also a presentation of God's ideal city being at the center of his rule. As Tate writes, the psalm expresses the expectation that Zion will become the mother city in a universal worship of Yahweh. So it's God's universal dominion. He created the nations. They exist as a result of his work. He rules over them even though they're in rebellion. One day they will come again under his rule, and they will come to him in his city. And even though they come from the nations and they are the nations, they will belong to Zion, as any of those descendants of Abraham, those faithful Jews, belong to Zion. So the exilic community who can be armed with this knowledge about God and his holy city, what do they get from a psalm like this? What is instilled within them? Well, it's very short, but it comes at the end in verse 7. As they make music, they will sing, all my fountains are in you. Now, again, this is another difficult verse to translate. I think the NLT does a good job filling out the likely meaning here. The people will play flutes and sing, the source of my life springs from Jerusalem. If Zion is the birthplace of the nations and the place from where God reigns and draws the nations back to him, then certainly faithful Israelites would have thought of Jerusalem as their spring of life. And I think this conviction is well stated in another Zion psalm, Psalm 46 and verse 4. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. See, the conviction here is that God is drawing people home from among the nations, Jews and Gentiles alike, bringing them back to Zion, the place where he rules and the place where he is worshiped. Now, while Psalm 87 is not quoted in the New Testament, I think the message of these Zion songs can certainly be felt in the book of Acts. You recall that Jesus promised his disciples, "You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." Acts 1 and verse 8. On Pentecost, visitors from every nation under heaven were gathered in God's holy city to hear the message of the crucified and risen Messiah. We read that in Acts chapter 2. Later, in Athens, Paul preached about the God who made the world and everything in it, saying in part, "From one man he made all the nations," there's that origin story, "that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands, Rahab and Cush and Philistia and Tyre and Ethiopia and those neighboring regions, Babylon even." God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he's not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Acts 17, verses 26 and 28. Now, I think Tanner makes a great point here. In today's world, this psalm seems far removed from our reality. Not only has God gone worldwide in God's presence, but Jerusalem is now a city divided by religious groups that hate each other and often declare that the world will only be safe when all the others are destroyed. We're definitely removed from the kinship this psalm declares. This is exactly why we may need this little psalm, for it expresses what we often forget. God birthed us all. We all come from the same origin, and eventually we will all return to the same source. Psalm 87 is the inspiration of the famous hymn written by John Newton, which says in part, "Glorious things of thee are spoken, Zion, city of our God. He whose word cannot be broken, formed thee for his own abode. On the rock of ages founded, what can shake thy sure repose? With salvation's wall surrounded, thou mayst smile at all thy foes." May God bless his holy city, and may God bless all of us as we strive to come back to the Lord from every corner of the earth. Thank you for being here for this study. May God bless you, and I'll see you next time.